Chapter 1. Return to the Past. The sleek black SUV rolled slowly along the narrow path leading into Maplewood, a small town nestled peacefully among lush green hills. The pale spring sunlight filtered through the budding branches, casting dappled shadows on the road. On either side, barren trees sprouted fresh buds, signaling the revival of life after a long, cold winter. James Carter, 35 years old, sat quietly behind the wheel, his eyes fixed on the familiar road he hadn't set foot on in 10 years. The cool air seeped through the slightly open window, carrying the faint scent of grass and sap. A weathered wooden sign with the words, "Welcome to Maplewood," appeared ahead, moss-covered yet standing tall, as if untouched by time. James slowed down, his gaze lingering on the sign for a brief moment. The familiar words stirred memories of his youth, summer afternoons spent cycling around town, and winter evenings by the fireplace with his parents. But now as he looked at it again, everything felt like a distant memory. His family's old house sat on a small hill, separated from the town center. The house, hidden behind large oak trees, bore the marks of time. The once white paint had faded. James stopped the car at the front gate, sitting silently in the driver's seat. His eyes locked on the simple wooden house filled with memories. 10 years. Back then, James left Maplewood with nothing but ambition and a dream. He hadn't looked back, driven by the desire to build a successful career in the big city. And he had succeeded. Now James was the CEO of a leading software corporation in the U.S., his fortune admired by many, his face gracing the covers of magazines. But despite all his achievements, deep down, he felt an emptiness he couldn't shake. James stepped out of the car, his leather shoes crunching softly on the dry leaves scattered across the ground. His footsteps echoed in the strange stillness of the town. As a child, whenever he returned home, his parents would always greet him at the window, smiling warmly. But now that window reflected only the image of a solitary man. James paused at the worn wooden steps, where the white painted door had cracked with age. He lightly touched the doorknob, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingertips. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior bathed in the fading afternoon light. Inside, everything remained as it had been the day he left. His father's shoes sat in the corner, the old armchair by the fireplace still in its place, and a family photo rested on the wooden table by the window, dust lightly covering its surface. The faint scent of aged wood lingered in the air, so familiar it tugged at James's heart. James walked slowly inside, his eyes tracing every corner of the house. He stopped by the fireplace, where his father's chair sat silently, a quiet witness to time. He knelt, gently resting his hand on the armrest, as if hoping to feel the lingering warmth of his parents. "I'm home," James thought to himself, but no one responded. He sank into the old sofa, his gaze drifting to the wooden ceiling, where small cracks stretched like the scars in his heart. His eyes stopped at the family photo hanging on the wall. In the picture, a younger James stood between his parents, his smile bright and carefree. Memories of his parents, who had passed away in a car accident while James was busy running his company, surfaced vividly. He remembered the evenings by the fireplace, his father's stories, and his mother preparing dinner in the kitchen. Those simple moments had become luxuries he could never reclaim. James closed his eyes, listening to the silence that enveloped the house. The success he had achieved in the bustling city could not fill the void left by his family's absence. He had everything, yet he had lost what mattered most. In that moment, James realized his return to Maplewood wasn't for work or any grand project. It was to rediscover a part of himself he had long forgotten. As the evening light faded, James sat quietly in the old house, surrounded by the echoes of cherished memories. Welcome to the Soul Stories. Today we bring you a meaningful tale. Sit back and enjoy the journey with us. Let us know which city in the world you are listening from. On an early spring morning, gentle sunlight filtered through the small window of the Maplewood Community Center. Emma Brooks, 30 years old, sat at her desk, her eyes fixed on the financial report pinned to the wall. The cup of coffee on her desk had long gone cold, but she barely noticed. Her brows furrowed slightly, and her gaze lingered on the large red-circled number at the bottom of the report. Budget deficit, $20,000. Emma sighed, leaning back in her chair, eyes drifting out the window to where the children were playing in the yard. Their laughter echoed, filling the office with a liveliness that momentarily lifted the heavy atmosphere. She smiled faintly, but the worry still pressed deep in her mind. The community center wasn't just Emma's workplace. It was her second home, a haven for countless families in need across the town. For the past 8 years, Emma had poured her heart and soul into maintaining this place. From organizing classes for children and assisting unemployed adults to gathering food donations for struggling families, she had been at the forefront of every effort. But now all of it was at risk of crumbling. Emma picked up a small notebook, flipping through pages filled with meticulous expense records. Despite cutting numerous costs, the shortfall remained daunting. The door to her office suddenly creaked open, pulling Emma from her thoughts. Sarah, Emma's best friend and longtime colleague, entered with a bright smile carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You need a break, Emma. I've been telling you, you've been a ghost this past week," Sarah said, placing 1 cup on the desk. Emma smiled lightly, accepting the cup but leaving it untouched. "Taking a break won't solve this," she said, nodding toward the financial report. Sarah glanced at the glaring red numbers on the wall, her expression darkening momentarily. But it didn't take long for an idea to spark in her eyes. "Then let's organize a charity auction at the upcoming spring festival," Sarah suggested, her excitement evident. Emma looked surprised. "A charity auction? You mean—" "Exactly," Sarah nodded confidently. "The spring festival is the biggest event in Maplewood every year. I'm sure if we hold an auction, people will participate. This community center is the pride of the town. No one wants to see it close." Emma remained silent, her gaze once again drifting to the window, where the children sat reading under the large oak tree. The sight of their innocent faces softened her heart. "Do you think it will work?" Emma asked quietly, though a flicker of hope began to spark in her eyes. Sarah smiled, placing a reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder. "I'm sure of it. Besides, what do you have to lose?" Emma chuckled and shook her head. "You're right. Let's give it a try." Emma and Sarah wasted no time, immediately diving into preparations for the auction. They reached out to residents across the town, asking for donations of handmade crafts, paintings, and even small services like gardening or house cleaning to auction off. A large notice board was set up in front of the community center with bold letters. "Charity auction. Together we save Maplewood Community Center." Every day, Emma spent time walking around town, visiting local shop owners and families to ask for contributions. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Many residents eagerly offered valuable items they had cherished for years. "This community center is the heart of Maplewood. We can't let it disappear," said the elderly owner of the town's bakery as she handed Emma an antique ceramic wedding cake topper to auction. The community's enthusiastic support touched Emma deeply. She realized that the center wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of unity, a place holding the fondest memories of many generations in Maplewood. Despite the positive momentum, Emma couldn't shake her lingering anxiety. Late at night, she often sat alone in her office, staring at the overwhelming list of expenses. What if the auction doesn't raise enough money? The question haunted her relentlessly. She knew that $20,000 was a significant amount, and even with a successful auction, reaching that goal wouldn't be easy. But every time doubt crept in, Emma thought of the children's laughter and the unwavering support of the town's residents. That was the motivation she needed to keep going, despite the challenges. A few days before the auction, Emma stood on the stage at the town's main square, double-checking every detail. Sarah joined her, crossing her arms as she looked up at the large banner hanging over the stage. "Do you think this auction will be enough to save the center?" Sarah asked, her voice soft but tinged with concern. Emma turned to her friend, smiling gently. "I'm not sure, but at least we've done everything we can." Sarah nodded, and together they silently gazed over Maplewood under the golden hues of the setting sun. Regardless of the outcome, Emma knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone in this fight. Maplewood was her home, and the people here were her extended family. And with their unity, she believed in the magic of compassion and sharing. Chapter 3. A Fateful Encounter. On the day of the Spring Festival, Maplewood adorned itself with a vibrant and lively atmosphere like never before. The town square bustled with craft stalls, sweet pastry stands, and traditional folk games. Colorful flags fluttered above, and the warm spring sunlight poured down the narrow streets, brightening the entire town. Laughter echoed everywhere. Children ran around with balloons in hand, while adults gathered around the stalls exchanging familiar stories. On the main stage at the center of the square, a large banner hung with bold letters. Charity auction, join hands to save the Maplewood Community Center. James Carter strolled slowly past the stalls, blending into the crowd, but he didn't rush to participate in any activities. He liked to observe, a habit cultivated through years of surviving the harsh corporate world. Since returning to Maplewood, this was the first time he had truly felt the lively spirit of the town he once left behind. The festival felt the same as in James's memories. Yet there was something new and familiar about it that he couldn't quite name. As he passed by the main stage, James paused. A woman was stepping onto the platform, her long brown hair loosely tied back, dressed in a simple yet elegant dress. She held the microphone in her hand, smiling warmly as she looked down at the crowd gathering below. It was Emma Brooks. "Hello, everyone," Emma began, her voice clear and confident without being showy. "I'm Emma Brooks, manager of the Maplewood Community Center. Today, I want to thank you all for being here at this charity auction. Together, we are trying to keep the center running, a place that is not only home to many children and families, but also a symbol of unity in Maplewood." From afar, James stood with his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on Emma. She didn't try to impress with fancy words or dazzling performance. The sincerity in her every word touched him in an unusual way, something James rarely felt at grand events in the upper class. He had met many women, but most were drawn to his fame and fortune. They loved lavish parties, expensive cars, and social status. But Emma, the woman standing on that stage, was completely different. James watched Emma closely, a faint smile crossing his lips. When the auction ended, James quietly made his way through the crowd toward the stage. Emma stood next to Sarah, discussing the auction's results, though despite their efforts, the amount raised fell significantly short. She turned around when she saw James approaching. "Hello, would you like to place another bid? We still have a few items left," Emma said with a light smile, her tone playfully teasing. James smiled and shook his head. "No, I think I came a little too late, but I want to help your center." Emma looked surprised, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "And you are?" "James Carter," James introduced himself calmly, extending his hand. "I just returned to town." Emma shook his hand, her smile showing no trace of distance. "I've heard about you. I didn't expect Maplewood to have a tech millionaire returning home." James chuckled. "I'm just an ordinary resident here, and I truly want to help the center. I'm willing to cover the remaining deficit." Emma stood silent for a moment as James spoke. Her gaze lingered on his sincere expression before she gently shook her head. "James, I really appreciate your offer, but—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I can't accept that money." James raised an eyebrow, unable to hide his surprise. "Why not?" "If you're in need, I believe this could resolve the issue immediately." Emma smiled softly, but her eyes reflected unwavering determination. "This community center belongs to Maplewood, to everyone in town. I want it to be sustained by the collective effort of the community, not solely by the generosity of one person, no matter who that may be." James remained silent, looking at Emma as if trying to understand her better. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. "Then what can I do?" James asked after a brief pause. Emma looked at him and offered a gentle smile. "If you truly want to help, join us for the summer festival. We're planning a larger fundraising event. I believe your presence will mean a lot to everyone." James nodded, accepting Emma's suggestion. He knew that he wouldn't just be an outsider. He would become a part of the Maplewood community. In that moment, James realized that Maplewood wasn't just a temporary stop. This place could mark the beginning of a new journey he had never anticipated. Chapter 4. Investment from the Heart. The soft afternoon sunlight gently blanketed Maplewood, stretching across the peaceful streets of the small town. James Carter sat in a small cafe near the town square, a cup of black coffee long gone cold in front of him. His eyes followed the community center building, where Emma Brooks was still busy with her daily work. Although the charity auction at the Spring Festival had achieved some success, the amount raised was still insufficient to keep the center running in the long term. James couldn't stop thinking about it. Why did she refuse? James wondered. His goodwill and desire to help had been gently but firmly declined. James wasn't used to rejection, especially when he was trying to do the right thing. The next day, James returned to the community center. As he walked in, Emma was stacking boxes of books and documents on the shelves. She looked up, smiling softly. "Hello, James. I didn't expect to see you again so soon," Emma said, her hands continuing their work swiftly. James stepped closer, leaning lightly against the edge of the table. "I've been thinking about the auction and my offer," he began. "I understand why you turned it down, but I can't stop feeling like I could do more." Emma paused, quietly observing James for a moment before placing the box of books on the table. "James, I don't want you to misunderstand. I truly appreciate your generosity, but if the center relies solely on a large sum from you, the community spirit we're trying to build will gradually fade." James nodded, respecting Emma's perspective, but that didn't mean he was going to give up. "Well," James smiled lightly, "what can I do to help without making you feel pressured?" Emma thought for a moment. Her eyes brightened as an idea sparked in her mind. "Actually, I do have an idea," Emma said, her gaze drifting to the window where the children were playing. "The summer festival is coming up. It's the biggest event of the year for the town, and I think we can organize a larger fundraiser involving the entire community." James's eyes lit up with interest. "A bigger event? That sounds exciting." Emma nodded. "Not just an auction, but local stalls, music performances, and other activities to draw people in. I believe if we make this event attractive enough, it won't just help the center, it will also ignite a stronger sense of unity in the town." James pondered for a moment, then laughed. "I like the way you think. I'll help. Consider me part of the organizing team." Emma and James quickly got to work. They sat down with the center's volunteer team, outlining every detail of the event. During the meetings, James carefully listened to everyone's input. He was surprised by the creativity and passion of the Maplewood residents, but also realized that most lacked the resources and connections needed to organize such a large-scale event. And that was where James could shine. James began reaching out to partners and businesses he knew from nearby towns and cities. Under his name, many companies agreed to sponsor the event by setting up booths, providing equipment, and supporting media coverage. "You really have influence," Sarah laughed as she watched the sponsor list grow longer. Emma looked at James, feeling deeply grateful. "I didn't expect you to put this much effort in." James smiled lightly. "You said it was for the community, right? Well, I'm part of this community too." To draw the townspeople in, James and Emma decided to hold a small promotional event right at the community center. They put up a large sign in the square, reading, "Maplewood Summer Festival. Join hands to fundraise for the community center." James personally visited every shop in town, meeting with bakery owners, cafe managers, and craftsmen, inviting them to join the event. Mrs. Lucille, the longtime bakery owner, enthusiastically agreed. "We'll make a special cake for the event. The community center has helped my son so much, and I can't stand by and do nothing." Gradually, news of the event spread throughout Maplewood. People eagerly contributed, from setting up booths to organizing games for children. James noticed something magical happening. The event was no longer just Emma's or the community center's responsibility. It belonged to the entire town. Emma stood beside James one late afternoon, watching the stage being built in the square. "Thank you, James. Without you, I don't think this would have come this far." James turned to her, his eyes gleaming under the sunset. "I think you helped me rediscover something I'd forgotten. The feeling of being part of something bigger than myself." A few days before the festival, Emma and James stood in the center's small meeting room, reviewing the entire plan. Everything was ready. Sarah walked in, holding a long list of volunteers. "Maplewood is ready for the biggest festival of the year." Emma turned to James, her smile radiant. "I'm looking forward to seeing the magic happen." James nodded, feeling lighter than ever. This wasn't just a fundraising event. It was a reconnection, not just with the community, but with his own soul. Chapter 5. A New Beginning. The summer sun bathed Maplewood, transforming the town into a vibrant painting. The town square seemed to don a new outfit, bustling with laughter and colors from stalls lining the streets. James Carter strolled leisurely past food stands and craft booths, immersing himself in the festival atmosphere. Children dashed around with balloons in hand, while adults gathered around sweet pastry and coffee stands. From a distance, he spotted Emma Brooks arranging items at the small community center booth. A gentle smile appeared on her face as she chatted with a child tugging at his mother's hand, begging for a souvenir. James paused, his gaze softening. Though he had met countless women in the dazzling business world, Emma brought something different: sincerity, warmth, and quiet strength. "James!" Emma looked up and waved as she caught him watching. Her warm smile remained. "Can you give me a hand with these boxes?" Emma tilted her head playfully, her eyes glinting with mischief. James laughed, quickly approaching. "Of course. I'm your unpaid assistant, remember?" Emma chuckled. "I should make the most of that before you change your mind." Together, they began rearranging the donated items. As Emma bent down to lift a heavy box, James immediately leaned in to help her. The space between them suddenly felt closer. James froze for a brief second as his hand brushed lightly against Emma's. A subtle warmth spread, making them lock eyes for a fleeting moment. Emma smiled softly and pulled her hand away, but James noticed the faint blush on her cheeks. "Be careful, don't hurt yourself," James said gently, his gaze softer than ever. Emma lowered her head, hiding her shy smile. "I've done this plenty of times. Don't worry." James said nothing more, but a strange feeling stirred inside him, a flutter he hadn't felt in a long time. As night descended, Maplewood shimmered under twinkling lights. On the main stage, James and Emma stood before the crowd, preparing for the charity auction. Emma stepped forward, holding the microphone with a radiant smile. "Thank you all for being here today. This auction is not just about raising funds for the community center, but a testament to the unity and spirit of our town." James stood beside her, admiring Emma as she spoke. She didn't need extravagance or flair. Her words alone held a magnetic charm. When Emma glanced toward James, their eyes met, and for a brief moment, James felt as if the world around them faded. After the auction, James and Emma stood by the stage, watching as the lights dimmed across the square and the townspeople slowly dispersed. "We raised $18,000, Emma said quietly, though a tinge of disappointment lingered in her voice. "Still a little short of our goal." James smiled faintly, his hands tucked into his pockets. "I think I can do something to cover the difference." Emma turned to look at James, a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. "I know what you did, James. Thank you." James shrugged slightly, but his gaze remained fixed on Emma. "I didn't do it just for the community center, at least not entirely." Emma paused, searching for the truth in his words. "Then why?" she asked softly, a subtle hope growing inside her. James looked into Emma's eyes, a gentle smile forming. "Because of you, Emma. Since I met you, I feel like I found something I lost a long time ago." Emma didn't respond immediately. She turned away, but the smile breaking across her face was impossible to hide. "James," she whispered. But in her heart she knew. The feelings stirring inside her for him were growing with each passing day. In the days following the festival, James spent more time at the community center, assisting Emma with new projects and activities. Every morning when James walked in with 2 cups of hot coffee, Emma couldn't help but laugh. "Are you planning to show up every day?" Emma teased, accepting the cup from his hand. "I'm not giving up anytime soon," James grinned, winking. "I like this better than being a CEO." Emma shook her head, but a warmth spread through her chest. Through small gestures, she gradually felt the depth of James's affection, not rushed, but sincere and enduring. And on those late afternoons, as they sat side by side watching the sun dip behind the trees, Emma realized James wasn't just a successful man returning to his hometown. He was someone who could become an essential part of her life. That feeling, gentle yet profound, was blossoming between them, opening a new chapter, not only for the community center, but for the hearts of 2 people who had once walked their paths alone. We'd love to hear your feedback. Leave a comment and let us know how you felt after watching the video. Your feedback is the motivation for us to continue bringing more meaningful stories. Chapter 6. A New Future. Time passed, and the Maplewood Community Center was livelier than ever. Laughter echoed through the hallways, children played in the yard, and families gathered for regular classes and activities. The flame of unity, hope, and compassion burned brightly, and the person behind it all was Emma Brooks. But she wasn't alone. James Carter, who had once stepped into town as a stranger, had now become an indispensable part of Maplewood. James sat beside Emma on the old wooden bench in front of the community center. He quietly watched the children play, his eyes lingering on a little girl laughing as she caught a balloon from her friend. "This scene reminds me of my childhood," James said softly, turning to Emma. Emma smiled, her eyes tender, as she gently leaned against his shoulder. "I think this center isn't just for the children. It's also a place that helped you find yourself again." James nodded. "It did, and it helped me find the person I want to be with." Emma looked up at James, surprise and warmth filling her gaze. "Emma," James gently took her hand, "I've lived in a rush, alone for too long. But since meeting you and working at the center, I realized happiness isn't in skyscrapers or big contracts. It's right here, with you and this community." Emma smiled softly, but tears of joy glistened in her eyes. James released her hand, stood up, and knelt before her, pulling a small box from his jacket pocket. He opened it to reveal a simple yet elegant silver ring, reflecting the glow of the setting sun. "Emma Brooks, will you marry me?" Emma raised her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with surprise. But as emotion swelled within her, she nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, James, I will." Applause erupted from a distance. Sarah and a few volunteers stood nearby, clapping and laughing. "Finally, we've been waiting for this moment for months," Sarah shouted excitedly. James laughed, pulling Emma into his arms while she smiled shyly. James and Emma's wedding took place on a warm afternoon in the small garden behind the community center. The ceremony wasn't extravagant or grand, just family, friends, and the people of Maplewood who had stood by them throughout their journey. Emma wore a simple white dress, holding a bouquet of daisies. She walked down the flower-strewn path toward James, who awaited her in a plain yet elegant suit. "I never thought I'd be standing here," Emma whispered as they exchanged rings. James gently squeezed her hand. "And I never thought I could find true happiness until I met you." As the couple shared a kiss, petals floated in the wind and cheers filled the garden. That day, Maplewood was filled with joy and love. After the wedding, James decided to spend most of his time in Maplewood. He became deeply involved in community projects with Emma, expanding programs to support children and families in need. Together, they launched the Expanding Light Project, which extended beyond Maplewood to neighboring towns. James used his connections to bring in resources for other community centers. On early mornings, James and Emma walked hand in hand around town, discussing plans for the future. They weren't just partners. They were companions in life, building a meaningful existence together. One autumn afternoon, Emma and James stood outside the community center, watching the children play in the yard. "Do you think the kids will remember these days when they grow up?" Emma asked, her gaze distant. James smiled softly. "I'm sure they will, and maybe one day they'll come back, like I did, searching for a part of their memories." Emma rested her head on James's shoulder, feeling his warmth. "As long as you're by my side, I believe everything will be just fine." James wrapped his arms around Emma and kissed her forehead gently. "We'll make sure of it, together." Beneath the golden sunset, the two stood side by side, witnessing the growth and blossoming of Maplewood. Happiness often doesn't come from grand things. It comes from love, shared moments, and the simple yet profound times spent with the one you cherish. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to hit like and share to spread the story to more people. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to never miss our latest videos. Thank you, and see you next time.